Admiral Zexhai of the Galactic Defense Fleet stared at the primitive vessel hovering outside Nexus Station with what could only be described as bewilderment. The ship was a patchwork of metal plates welded together with visible seams, powered by what appeared to be controlled nuclear explosions, and held together by what his sensors insisted was some form of metal binding agent that his computer refused to classify as anything more sophisticated than industrial adhesive. "This is their flagship?" he asked his aide, a nervous Quillen whose four eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sure sign of stress among his species.
According to their transmissions, yes, Admiral. They call it the USS Determination.
The vessel appears to be homemade. Zexay's mandibles clicked in the Vrex equivalent of a sigh. 300 years of war against the Void Swarm had reduced the once mighty Galactic Defense Fleet to desperate measures, but this was beyond desperate. This was approaching the realm of cosmic comedy. The communication array crackled to life, and a voice emerged, speaking in heavily accented Galactic Standard, with an enthusiasm that bordered on the manic. "Nexus Station, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force, requesting permission to dock and present our proposal to end the war." Zexay gestured for his aide to respond while he processed what he'd just heard. End the war? This species had been monitoring galactic communications for exactly 47 standard cycles. They'd witnessed maybe a handful of battles, understood virtually nothing about the enemy they faced, and possessed technology that belonged in a museum. Captain Chen, his aide, responded, "Admiral Zexhai will grant you an audience. Docking Bay 7 is being prepared for your vessel. Much obliged, Nexus Station. Fair warning, we're not exactly built for your standard docking procedures. We might need to get creative." Zexai watched through the viewport as the human ship approached the docking bay with all the grace of a dying asteroid. It lurched, spun slightly, corrected with puffs of chemical thrust, and somehow managed to settle into the bay with only minor scraping against the dock walls. The sound of metal on metal echoed through the station's hull. "Creative indeed," muttered Zexai. An hour later, he found himself in Conference Room Alpha, facing three humans who looked like they'd stepped out of a primitive military recruitment poster. Captain Chen was a compact woman with short black hair and eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of the room. Her companions, introduced as Colonel Martinez and Dr. Thompson, flanked her with the easy confidence of soldiers who'd seen combat. "Admiral," Chen began without preamble, "we know what you're thinking. We're primitives who've been listening in on your war for less than 2 months. We use chemical rockets and metal bullets. Our most advanced AI can barely manage planetary logistics. What could we possibly offer?" "The thought had occurred to me," Zex admitted. Around the conference table, representatives from 12 of the 17 remaining galactic species shifted uncomfortably. The ethereals flickered with annoyance, while the hive mind delegates whispered among themselves in ultrasonic frequencies. "Here's the thing," Chen continued. Activating a primitive holographic display that projected grainy images of recent battles. "We've been watching your fights, and we think we know why you're losing." The room erupted in multilingual outrage. The cetacean delegates' water tank bubbled furiously, while the silicon-based architects rang like struck bells in protest. Zexay himself felt his carapace bristle. "You think you understand our failures?" asked Ambassador Thirin of the Ethereal Collective, her form crackling with indignant energy. "We have fought this war for 3 centuries. Our greatest minds have been thinking like civilized beings," Chen interrupted. "And that's exactly the problem." The room fell silent. Dr. Thompson stepped forward, his tablet displaying combat footage from the last major engagement at the Kepler defensive line. "Look at this battle," he said. "Void Swarm ships emerge from their dimensional tiers. Your fleets respond with precise formations, advanced tactics, coordinated strikes. Everything a military academy would teach. Everything that makes sense when fighting a conventional enemy." Colonel Martinez picked up the narrative. "But the Swarm isn't conventional. They don't follow rules of engagement. They don't have supply lines to cut or command structures to decapitate. They're more like a natural disaster with teeth." "And how," asked Admiral Zexhai, his voice carefully controlled, "would your species handle such an enemy?" Captain Chen smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression that made several delegates unconsciously lean back.
"We'd stop trying to fight them like soldiers," she said.
"And start fighting them like humans." She gestured to Dr. Thompson, who began displaying what appeared to be historical footage from Earth. Grainy, primitive recordings of massive explosions, collapsing structures, and environmental devastation. "Humans have a saying," Chen explained. If something is strong enough to kill you, make sure you kill it first. If something is tough enough to survive your attacks, hit it harder. If something is smart enough to outthink you, don't think, just react. The footage shifted to show human military operations, guerrilla warfare, asymmetric tactics, the kind of brutal, pragmatic violence that made civilized species uncomfortable. Your species fight with honor, Colonel Martinez added. You follow the galactic conventions of warfare. You minimize collateral damage, protect civilian populations, preserve infrastructure. All admirable traits that mark you as truly advanced civilizations. But, prompted Zexhay, though he suspected he knew where this was heading. But the Void Swarm doesn't care about honor, Chen said flatly. They don't have civilians to protect or infrastructure to preserve. They're not fighting for territory or resources. They're fighting for the fundamental right to exist in our reality. And when something threatens the basic existence of everything you care about, you don't fight fair. You fight to win. Dr. Thompson activated another display, this one showing tactical simulations run on Earth's primitive computers. We've analyzed every major battle from the last 50 years, he explained. The swarm has 3 major advantages. They can emerge from dimensional tiers at any point in space. They regenerate damage faster than most weapons can inflict it. And they grow stronger by consuming the exotic matter that powers your advanced technology. We're aware of these facts, said the hive mind delegate, its voice a harmonious chorus of frustration. If you think you can simply inform us of what we already know, we're not here to inform you. Chen interrupted again. We're here to propose a solution. Give us 5 battles. 5 chances to show you how humans wage war. If we can't prove our methods work, we'll return to Earth and leave you to handle this your way. The conference room erupted in another wave of multilingual discussion. Ambassador Thyron flickered rapidly through several spectral frequencies before settling on a particularly dubious shade of orange. 5 battles, she said slowly. Against an enemy that has defeated our combined fleets for 3 centuries, using primitive technology and barbaric tactics. This is your proposal? Pretty much, Chen agreed cheerfully, though we'd need access to some of your manufacturing capabilities, and maybe a few volunteers from your special forces units. The ones who aren't too attached to fighting fair. Admiral Zexhay studied the humans carefully. In his 4 centuries of life, he'd encountered many species, but never one quite like this. They displayed a casual confidence that bordered on insanity, combined with a pragmatic approach to violence that his civilized mind found both fascinating and disturbing. What makes you think your methods will succeed where ours have failed? He asked. Chen exchanged glances with her companions before answering. Because we're not trying to win a war, she said simply. We're trying to commit genocide against something that wants to eat reality. And humans have gotten very, very good at that sort of thing, when our survival is on the line. The bluntness of the statement sent a chill through the assembled delegates. The cetacean representative's water temperature dropped several degrees, while the crystalline beings dimmed noticeably. You're talking about the complete annihilation of an entire species, whispered Ambassador Thyron. We're talking about the survival of every other species in the galaxy, Colonel Martinez replied. Sometimes you have to choose between being civilized and being alive. We'd prefer to be both, but if we can only pick one. He shrugged with an eloquence that needed no translation. Admiral Zexhay looked around the conference table, seeing the same desperate calculation in every delegate's eyes. 300 years of honorable warfare had brought them to the brink of extinction. Their advanced tactics, sophisticated weapons, and civilized approach to conflict had proven useless against an enemy that viewed reality itself as a meal to be consumed. 5 battles, he said finally. You'll be assigned support vessels and given access to our manufacturing facilities. But I want observers from each member species present to document your methods. Fair enough, Chen agreed. Just remember, we're going to be fighting this war like humans. It's going to get ugly, it's going to get brutal, and it's going to violate probably every convention of civilized warfare you've ever established. If that bothers you, speak up now. The room remained silent except for the ambient hum of the station's life support systems. Good, Chen said, standing and extending her hand to Admiral Zexhay in the primitive human gesture of agreement. Then let's go end the war. As the Admiral clasped the human's small, soft hand in his own armored appendage, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a deal with something far more dangerous than the Void Swarm itself. Time would tell if that was humanity's greatest asset, or their most terrifying flaw. The Kepler system had been under siege for 8 standard months. What had once been a thriving trade hub with 12 inhabited worlds was now a graveyard of shattered planets and twisted space-time. The Void Swarm had established a foothold in the system's asteroid belt, using the cosmic debris as raw material to spawn new horrors that defied conventional physics. Admiral Zaxhay stood on the bridge of the galactic defense ship Eternal Vigilance, watching as the human task force made its final preparations for what Captain Chen had cheerfully dubbed Operation Pest Control. The name alone had caused diplomatic incidents among 3 separate species who found the terminology offensive. Admiral, his communications officer announced, the humans are requesting all Allied ships maintain a minimum distance of 50,000 kilometers from the primary engagement zone. 50,000? Zexay's mandibles clicked in surprise.
That puts us completely outside effective weapons range. How do they expect us to provide support?
According to Captain Chen, the officer continued with barely concealed bewilderment. They don't want support.
They want witnesses. Through the viewport, Zexhay could see the human fleet forming up in what appeared to be a completely random arrangement. No battle lines, no coordinated formations, no tactical cohesion whatsoever. Ships of wildly different sizes and configurations scattered across space like debris from an explosion. Sir, his tactical officer reported, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the human vessels. They appear to be charging their weapons? Zexhay activated his personal communication channel to the USS Determination. Captain Chen, our sensors indicate dangerous power buildups across your fleet. Are you experiencing system malfunctions? Chen's voice crackled back with what sounded suspiciously like laughter. No malfunctions, Admiral. Just making sure we have enough firepower for what comes next. Fair warning. You might want to shield your optical sensors in about 30 seconds. Shield our sensors? Captain, what exactly are you planning to? The first Void Swarm ship emerged from its dimensional tear exactly where human intelligence had predicted it would. The creature was a nightmare of writhing tentacles and impossible angles, larger than a battlecruiser, and radiating the kind of wrongness that made reality itself recoil. What happened next violated every principle of civilized warfare Zexhay had ever learned. Instead of forming defensive lines or attempting to maneuver for tactical advantage, every human ship opened fire simultaneously. But these weren't the precise measured strikes of conventional warfare. This was a torrential downpour of destruction that turned space itself into a killing field. The humans had taken their primitive projectile weapons and scaled them up beyond all reason. Kinetic penetrators the size of shuttlecraft screamed through space at significant fractions of light speed. Nuclear warheads, hundreds of them, detonated in carefully orchestrated sequences that turned entire cubic kilometers of space into miniature stars. But it was the experimental weapons that truly shocked the assembled fleet. By the ancient gods, whispered the ethereal observer, her form flickering through spectrums that had no names. What are those energy signatures? Doctor! Thompson's voice came over the communication channel, speaking with the calm detachment of a university lecturer. Tactical singularity generators. We took the concept from your gravitational weapons and removed all the safety protocols. Each one creates a micro-black hole with a lifespan of about 15 seconds. 15 seconds? Zexhay stared at his displays in horror as space itself began to warp around the battle zone. The destabilization effects could tear reality a new one if we're not careful, Colonel Martinez agreed cheerfully. That's why we calculated the exact yields needed to damage the swarm ships without causing permanent dimensional scarring. Probably. Well, this is the first field test. Computer simulations only go so far. The Void Swarm ship, caught in the crossfire of weapons that shouldn't exist, began to writhe and emit sounds that human instruments couldn't properly register. Its reality-warping abilities, which had allowed it to shrug off 3 centuries of galactic weapons, seemed confused by attacks that were themselves violations of natural law. The creature is attempting to regenerate, reported the hive mind tactical specialist, its harmonic voice tinged with fascination. But the damage patterns are inconsistent with known physics. Captain Chen's voice cut through the observation. That's because we're not trying to fight it fair. Thompson, deploy the reality anchors. Across the human fleet, devices that looked like oversized tuning forks began to emit a harmonic frequency that made every sensitive being on the observation ships physically ill. Space itself seemed to solidify around the Void Swarm creature, locking it into baseline reality and preventing its usual dimensional escape tactics. What is that sound? Gasped Ambassador Theron, her ethereal form flickering between visible and invisible. White noise, Doctor, Thompson explained. But white noise across every possible dimensional frequency we could calculate. The swarm ships use interdimensional phase variance to avoid damage, so we're jamming every dimension simultaneously. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The Void Swarm ship, locked into three-dimensional space and unable to access its extra-dimensional abilities, began to die. But it didn't die quietly or cleanly. It thrashed and screamed across radio frequencies, releasing energies that turned the surrounding asteroid field into glowing plasma. "Incoming dimensional tears," announced the human sensor operator. "Looks like Mum is calling for backup." "How many?" asked Chen. 12, no, 15. "Wait, Admiral, we've got 23 confirmed tiers opening across the system." This was the moment that had broken every previous galactic defense. When the Void Swarm called for reinforcements, they came in overwhelming numbers, emerging from dimensional rifts that opened faster than any fleet could respond to. But the humans didn't seem concerned. "Right on schedule," Captain Chen announced. "Martinez, initiate protocol Scorched Earth."
With pleasure, Captain. What followed redefined Admiral Zexaisai's understanding of the term overkill.
Every human ship simultaneously released clouds of what appeared to be metallic dust. Within seconds, the dust had spread throughout the entire engagement zone, coating asteroids, debris, and empty space with a thin layer of reflective particles. "Nanomachines," Dr. Thompson explained in response to the panicked questions flooding the communication channels. "Self-replicating, solar-powered, and programmed with one simple instruction. Find Void Swarm biosignatures and attach explosive charges." The first Void Swarm reinforcements emerged into space that had been transformed into a three-dimensional minefield. As each creature materialized from its dimensional tier, it was immediately swarmed by millions of microscopic machines that burrowed through its reality-warping hide and detonated with the force of small nuclear devices. "This is..." Admiral Zexaisai struggled to find words. "This is genocide." "Yes," Captain Chen agreed without hesitation. "Genocide against things that want to eat the universe. Sometimes the universe needs a good immune response. Product." The battle, if it could even be called that, was over within an hour. 24 Void Swarm ships lay dead or dying in space that had been transformed into a toxic wasteland of radiation, exotic matter and nanomachine swarms that would continue hunting Void Swarm biosignatures for the next several decades. "Cleanup crews will need full hazmat protection for the next 50 years, Dr. Thompson reported with the same calm tone he might use to discuss lunch plans. "The radiation levels are a bit higher than we calculated, and some of the nanomachines seem to have evolved additional target parameters." "Additional target parameters?" asked the crystalline observer, its mineral structure ringing with alarm. "They've started attacking anything with Void Swarm genetic markers," Thompson explained, "which includes any ship, asteroid, or space debris that's been in contact with swarm creatures."
We're basically looking at a permanent quarantine zone.
Ambassador Thyron's form flickered through several spectrums of what could only be described as existential horror. "You've turned an entire star system into a death trap." "We've turned an entire star system into a void swarm-free zone," Colonel Martinez corrected. "Big difference." Admiral Zexai stared at the tactical displays, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. The humans had won their first battle against the Void Swarm, not through superior technology or brilliant tactics, but by demonstrating a level of ruthless pragmatism that bordered on psychopathy. They had violated every convention of warfare, poisoned an entire system, and deployed weapons that would continue killing for decades to come. And they had done it all with the casual efficiency of exterminators dealing with household pests. "Captain Chen," he said finally, "your methods are effective, but the collateral damage is acceptable," Chen interrupted, "when measured against the survival of galactic civilization. Admiral, your people have been fighting this war with one hand tied behind your backs because you're afraid of becoming monsters. But sometimes, the only way to fight monsters is to become something they're afraid of." As the human fleet began its withdrawal, leaving behind a star system that would serve as a tomb for Void Swarm creatures for the next millennium, Admiral Zexai found himself contemplating an uncomfortable truth. The humans were right. They were absolutely, terrifyingly right. And that realization was somehow more frightening than the Void Swarm itself. 4 battles remaining. Captain Chen's voice crackled over the communication channel. "Next up, the vegan defensive line. We hear you've been having some trouble with swarm breeding colonies." Her tone suggested she was looking forward to the challenge. Admiral Zexai wasn't sure if that was reassuring or absolutely terrifying. The Vega system had been lost to the Void Swarm 18 months ago, but it had never been reclaimed because of what the creatures had done there. Instead of simply consuming the planets and moving on, they had turned the entire system into a breeding ground. 3 gas giants now pulsed with unnatural life. Their atmospheres transformed into gestational chambers for new varieties of void swarm creatures that defied classification. Standing on the observation deck of the retrofitted human carrier USS Pandora's Box, Admiral Zexhai watched through heavily shielded viewports as the human fleet prepared for what Captain Chen had designated Operation Maternal Instincts. The name had required 3 hours of translation and cultural briefings before the galactic observers understood the implications. Admiral, reported Commander Vextai, his aide, the human fleet has assumed positions around all 3 breeding worlds simultaneously. Our tactical computers cannot determine their strategy. That was because human strategy, Zexhai was learning, operated on principles that civilized military doctrine actively avoided. Where galactic forces would establish containment protocols and develop surgical strikes to minimize system damage, the humans approached problems with the subtlety of a meteor impact.
Captain Chen, Zexhai activated his communication channel. Our scans indicate the breeding colonies have reached critical mass. If those creatures complete their development cycle, they'll spread to 12 surrounding systems within a month. Chen finished.
We know. That's why we're not giving them the chance.
Through the tactical displays, Zexhai watched as human ships began deploying what appeared to be massive metallic spheres around each of the 3 gas giants.
Each sphere was roughly the size of a small moon and bristled with equipment that his sensors couldn't properly identify. Dr. Thompson. He called to the human scientist. What are those devices? Thompson's voice carried the enthusiasm of someone about to explain his favorite hobby. Stellar manipulation platforms. We took the basic concept from your star-lifting technology and scaled it up. Way up. Scaled it up for what purpose? Well, Thompson paused. You know how gas giants are basically failed stars that didn't have quite enough mass to ignite fusion? A cold realization began forming in Zex's mind. Doctor, what exactly are you planning to do? We're going to fix that oversight. The implications hit the galactic observers like a physical blow. Ambassador Theron's ethereal form flickered through several spectrums of pure panic while the hive mind delegates began harmonizing in frequencies that translated roughly as, "What the hell? You're going to ignite 3 gas giants," Zexhai said slowly, hoping he'd misunderstood. "You're going to turn them into stars, temporary stars," Colonel Martinez clarified helpfully. "The fusion reaction will only last about 6 hours before the stellar mass disperses. But for those 6 hours, we'll have 3 new suns burning at approximately 4,000 degrees Kelvin. The radiation alone will sterilize everything within 50 astronomical units." Dr. Thompson agreed cheerfully, which is exactly the range we need to ensure complete elimination of all void swarm biological material in the system. The crystalline observer began resonating at frequencies that indicated extreme distress. You're talking about destroying an entire star system. The gravitational effects alone will be manageable, Thompson interrupted. We've run the calculations 12 times. The temporary stellar ignition will disrupt local gravity fields, but the system should stabilize once the reactions burn out. Probably. Probably? The word came out as a strangled whisper from multiple species simultaneously. Captain Chen's voice cut through the growing panic. Look, people, we could spend the next decade trying to surgically remove breeding colonies from 3 different worlds while fighting off their defensive swarms. Or we can solve the problem permanently in 6 hours. Which option sounds better to you? Before anyone could answer, the first manipulation platform began its work. The process was both beautiful and terrifying. Massive gravitational lenses focused exotic matter into the core of the first gas giant, compressing its hydrogen atmosphere beyond critical density. At the same time, fusion catalysts, devices that shouldn't exist according to current physics, began triggering nuclear reactions in a carefully controlled cascade. "Ignition in 30 seconds, announced the human fleet coordinator. "All observation ships should activate maximum radiation shielding and begin retreat to safe distance." "What's safe distance?" asked the cetacean delegate, his water tank already beginning protective protocols. "About 12 light years," Martinez replied. "But we figured you'd want to stick around and watch, so we brought party favors." The human ship suddenly activated some kind of defensive screen that turned space around the observation fleet into a shimmering bubble of distorted reality. Energy readings spiked beyond anything the galactic sensors could measure. "Portable pocket dimension," Dr. Thompson explained. "We'll be observing from slightly outside normal spacetime. Should provide adequate protection from the stellar events." The first gas giant ignited. What had been a swirling mass of clouds and breeding chambers became a newborn star in the span of 17 seconds. The fusion reaction blazed to life with the fury of controlled stellar collapse, sending waves of radiation and exotic particles screaming through the system at light speed.
The Void Swarm breeding colonies never had a chance. Admiral Zexai watched in fascinated horror as creatures the size of continents were incinerated in the first milliseconds of the stellar ignition. The breeding chambers that had taken months to construct were vaporized instantly, along with millions of developing swarm creatures that would never threaten galactic civilization. Breeding Colony Alpha eliminated, reported the tactical coordinator, initiating ignition sequence for Colony Beta. The second gas giant followed its predecessor into temporary stellar existence, adding its light to the growing inferno that was consuming everything in the system. Asteroids melted, planets cracked under the gravitational stress. Space itself seemed to burn as exotic radiations interacted with the fundamental forces of physics. "This is madness," whispered Ambassador Thyron. "You're destroying everything." "We're sterilizing everything," Captain Chen corrected. "There's a difference. When we're done here, this system will be completely free of void swarm contamination for the next 10,000 years." The third and final gas giant ignited just as the first began to collapse back into normal matter. For a brief moment, the Vega system contained 3 active stars, their combined radiance visible from neighboring systems as a brilliant new constellation. But it was what happened during the stellar collapse that truly demonstrated human innovation. "Now comes the interesting part," Dr. Thompson announced. Initiating gravitational wave propagation. The collapsing stars didn't simply burn out and return to normal. Instead, they generated precisely calculated gravitational pulses that rippled outward through space-time itself. These waves carried a specific harmonic frequency, the same reality anchor frequency the humans had used in their first battle. "Dimensional lockdown waves," Thompson explained to his captivated audience. Any void swarm creature within a 50 light-year radius just lost the ability to phase shift between dimensions. They're locked into baseline reality for the next 72 hours. The tactical implications were staggering. Across 12 neighboring systems, void swarm forces suddenly found themselves unable to retreat into dimensional space or call for reinforcements from their extra-dimensional strongholds. They were trapped, vulnerable, and completely cut off from their support networks. "You've just crippled every swarm force in this entire sector," Admiral Zexgay realized. "They can't escape, they can't regenerate, and they can't call for help." "Exactly," Captain Chen agreed. "Which brings us to the next phase of the operation."
Next phase?
"Well, we can't exactly leave them there to recover, can we?" What followed was the largest coordinated strike in the history of the war. Human task forces, supported by volunteer units from every galactic species, swept through 12 star systems in perfect synchronization. The dimensional locked void swarm forces, unable to access their reality warping abilities, were systematically hunted down and destroyed. It was less a battle than an extermination campaign. The humans had turned the swarm's greatest advantage, their interdimensional mobility, against them. Trapped in normal space, the creatures were vulnerable to conventional weapons, conventional tactics, and conventional thinking. The very civilization and honor that had handicapped the galactic forces for 3 centuries became assets once the enemy could no longer simply disappear when threatened. Within 72 hours, 12 star systems had been cleared of void swarm presence for the first time in decades. The cost had been 1 star system transformed into a radioactive wasteland, and the temporary reorganization of local space-time, but the strategic victory was undeniable. 2 battles down, Captain Chen announced as the combined fleets regrouped in the ruins of the Vega system. 3 to go. Admiral Zexai studied the tactical reports, each one documenting the complete elimination of void swarm forces that had resisted galactic military might for generations. The human methods were brutal, excessive, and completely effective. "Captain," he said finally, "your success is remarkable. But I must ask, do your people have any concept of proportional response?" Chen was quiet for a moment before responding. "Admiral, proportional response is what got you stuck in a 300-year war. The Void Swarm doesn't understand mercy, negotiation, or restraint. They understand survival and extinction. So we're giving them a choice between the two. And if they choose survival, then they get to keep existing in whatever corner of reality we decide not to sterilize," Chen replied, "but they don't get to threaten anyone else's existence ever again." As the human fleet prepared for departure, Admiral Zexai contemplated the terrifying efficiency of human warfare. They didn't just defeat their enemies, they eliminated the possibility of future conflict by making the cost of aggression so catastrophically high that surrender became the only rational choice. It was brilliant, it was horrifying, and it was working. 3 battles remaining, and the Void Swarm was already learning to fear something new in the galaxy. Something that fought back harder than they did. The Void Swarm's primary stronghold existed in a region of space that officially didn't exist. Located in the space between galaxy clusters, the Null Zone was a wound in reality itself where the normal laws of physics had been systematically dismantled and rebuilt according to alien logic. For 2.5 centuries, the Galactic Defense Fleet had tried and failed to penetrate the Null Zone. Ships that entered either vanished entirely or returned as twisted amalgamations of metal and flesh, their crews transformed into things that begged to be destroyed, while simultaneously trying to convert their rescuers. It was, by unanimous agreement among 17 species, the most terrifying place in known space, which was exactly why Captain Chen had requested it as the target for their third battle. "I must strongly protest this course of action," Admiral Zexhai declared for the 4th time in as many hours. He stood in the briefing room of the newly constructed human battle platform USS Necessary Evil, surrounded by officers who discussed interdimensional warfare with the casual familiarity others reserved for weather reports. "Your concerns are noted," Captain Chen replied, studying holographic displays that showed the Null Zone in all its impossible glory. "But this is where we cut the head off the snake. The Swarm's been using the Null Zone as their primary dimensional anchor for 3 centuries. As long as it exists, they can always retreat, regroup, and try again." Dr. Thompson, now sporting what appeared to be cybernetic implants that allowed him to interface directly with exotic physics computers, gestured to the tactical display. "The Null Zone isn't just a stronghold, it's a dimensional gateway hub. Our analysis suggests it connects to at least 47 different reality layers. Destroy it, and we cut the Swarm off from 90% of their reinforcement capabilities. Assuming," added Colonel Martinez with a grin that made several observers uncomfortable, "we can survive long enough to plant the charges." The plan, as outlined by Human Tactical Command, was simultaneously brilliant and insane. Instead of attempting to fight their way through the Null Zone's defenses, they intended to dive directly into the heart of the anomaly and detonate what Dr. Thompson cheerfully described as a reality bomb. "A reality bomb," repeated Ambassador Thyron, her ethereal form flickering through spectrums that suggested philosophical distress. "You're proposing to detonate the fundamental forces that hold existence together." "Only locally," Thompson assured her. "The explosion will propagate through the dimensional substrata underlying the Null Zone, causing a cascade failure that should collapse the entire anomaly back into normal spacetime. Think of it as cosmic pest control on a truly epic scale." "And the side effects?" asked the hive mind delegate, its harmonic voice carefully modulated to convey skepticism. "Well," Thompson consulted his cybernetic displays, "there's a small chance the explosion could tear a hole in reality large enough to swallow this entire galactic cluster. But our calculations show that's only a 12% probability." 12%! The exclamation came from multiple species simultaneously, causing a harmonic resonance that briefly scrambled communication systems. "Could be as low as 8%, Martinez added helpfully. "We've been refining the math." Admiral Zexai activated his emergency communication protocols, preparing to contact the Galactic Council and declare the humans officially insane. But before he could complete the transmission, Captain Chen placed a small, soft hand on his armored appendage. "Admiral," she said quietly, "in the 3 days since we cleared the Vega system, how many new swarm incursions have been reported?" Zexai checked his tactical updates. 47 separate attacks across the Outer Rim. But what does that... "They're getting desperate," Chen interrupted, "throwing everything they have left at civilian targets because they know we're winning. Every hour we delay this operation, more people die. And if we don't cut off the dimensional access soon, they'll eventually overwhelm us through sheer numbers." She gestured to the tactical display showing swarm movements across the galaxy. "Look at the pattern, Admiral. They're not just attacking randomly. They're systematically targeting every species' homeworlds. This isn't warfare anymore. It's extinction-level retaliation." The truth of her words hit Zexahei like a physical blow. The Void Swarm, faced with the first real defeats in their 3-century campaign, had abandoned all strategic restraint. They were attempting to cause maximum damage before their inevitable defeat, turning their final battle into a genocide campaign against all organic life. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Our projections suggest 3 weeks before they achieve critical mass for a galaxy-wide simultaneous strike." "Doctor," Thompson replied. "After that, even destroying the Null Zone won't stop them. There'll be too many independent forces scattered across too many systems." Zexhai studied the assembled humans, trying to understand how a species barely old enough to have discovered fire could possess such a clear understanding of cosmic-scale warfare. Then he realized the answer was disturbingly simple. They understood it because this was how they approached every conflict.
Not as a contest between equals, but as an existential struggle where only one side would survive to tell the story. "What do you need from us?" he asked finally. "Volunteers," Chen replied immediately. "This mission has a projected survival rate of about 15%. We're not ordering anyone into the null zone, but we could use technical specialists who understand exotic physics and aren't afraid of what might happen to their molecular structure." To Admiral Zexhay's amazement, nearly half the observation team volunteered immediately. 6 hours later, the combined fleet approached the edge of the null zone in a formation that defied every tactical manual ever written. Instead of battle lines or defensive formations, the ships were arranged in what appeared to be a complex geometric pattern based on multidimensional mathematics. "The formation creates a stable reality bubble," Dr. Thompson explained to his increasingly nervous audience. "As long as we maintain the pattern, our ships should remain anchored in baseline physics, even when surrounded by impossible space." "Should remain," muttered the crystalline observer. "Why do human tactical plans always include uncertainty parameters?" "Because certainty is for people who haven't tried to blow up fundamental forces," Martinez replied cheerfully. The first Void Swarm defenders appeared before they'd crossed the zone's outer boundary. But these weren't the creatures they'd fought in previous battles. These were things that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their forms shifting between states of matter that had no names in any known language. The human response was characteristically direct. "All ships activate reality enforcement protocols," Captain Chen ordered. "Thompson, begin dimensional saturation bombardment." What followed redefined the concept of overkill. The human fleet unleashed weapons that attacked the fundamental structure of space-time itself, forcing the null zone's twisted physics to conform to baseline reality through sheer firepower. Reality anchor devices created pockets of normal space where human tactics could function, while exotic matter bombs simplified complex dimensional geometries into three-dimensional targets that could be destroyed conventionally. It was like watching someone solve a mathematical equation with a sledgehammer. Crude, brutal, and surprisingly effective. "Void Swarm Command Center detected," announced the tactical coordinator. "Distance, 12,000 kilometers, bearing 0 Mark 7. Warning, target exists in 17 different dimensional phases simultaneously." "Stop." "Copy that," Chen replied. "Martinez, deploy the universe crackers." Admiral Zexhay didn't want to know what universe crackers were, but he asked anyway. "Weapons that attack the mathematical constants underlying reality," Martinez explained with terrifying casualness. "We temporarily alter the speed of light, the gravitational constant, and the strong nuclear force in a localized area. Anything caught in the effect zone gets to experience what physics would be like if the universe had been designed by someone with a really bad sense of humor." The deployment of universe crackers against the Void Swarm Command Center was like watching reality have a nervous breakdown. Space twisted into impossible angles, time flowed backward and forward simultaneously, and matter experienced states of existence that had never been observed by any scientific instrument. The swarm defenders, creatures perfectly adapted to impossible physics, found themselves completely unable to cope with physics that were merely very, very wrong. "Target eliminated," reported tactical, reading complete dimensional collapse across the command structure. Swarm forces appear to be confused. That was an understatement. Across the null zone, Void Swarm creatures that had operated according to alien logic for millennia were suddenly faced with a reality that obeyed human logic, which is to say, no logic at all, just the ruthless application of force until problems stopped being problems. "Phase 2, Captain Chen announced. "Deploy the reality bomb." The reality bomb was contained in what appeared to be a simple metallic sphere about the size of a shuttle. It looked completely harmless, which made it approximately 1 billion times more terrifying than any conventional weapon. "The device works by convincing the universe that the null zone doesn't exist," Dr. Thompson explained as they watched the bomb drift toward the dimensional anomaly's core. "It's basically a philosophical argument backed up by exotic mathematics and powered by the collective willpower of every human who's ever looked at something impossible and decided to make it possible anyway." "You're using willpower as a weapon component?" asked Ambassador Thyron, her form cycling through spectrums of pure disbelief. "Consciousness affects reality at the quantum level," Thompson replied. "We just scaled up the effect and weaponized it. Human stubbornness is apparently a fundamental force when properly focused." The reality bomb reached the center of the null zone and activated with an effect that was impossible to describe and equally impossible to ignore. Reality reasserted itself across 3,000 cubic light-years with the violence of a cosmic correction. The null zone, which had existed as a wound in space-time for countless eons, was suddenly forced to remember that it was supposed to be normal space. The process was not gentle. Dimensional barriers collapsed. Impossible geometries straightened themselves into conventional three-dimensional space. Creatures that existed in 47 dimensions simultaneously were compressed into baseline reality with predictable results. When the effect finally stabilized, the null zone was gone. In its place was a perfectly ordinary region of empty space, containing the debris of the largest void swarm stronghold ever destroyed, and the molecular remains of approximately 12 billion creatures that had learned too late that human determination was a force of nature. Mission accomplished, Captain Chen announced as the fleet began its withdrawal. Reality has been successfully restored to local space-time. Minor side effects include temporal echoes that should fade within a few decades, and some gravity wells that might behave strangely for the next century or so. Admiral Zexay stared at his tactical displays, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. The humans had fought their way into the most dangerous region in known space, destroyed the primary stronghold of an enemy that had resisted all attacks for 3 centuries, and done it all with weapons that attacked the fundamental structure of reality itself. And they'd suffered exactly 37 casualties. How? He asked finally. How did you do it? Captain Chen smiled, and for once it wasn't the predatory expression that had characterized her previous tactical discussions. We didn't try to understand their physics, she said simply. We just brought our own and made them use it instead. As the fleet headed back towards civilized space, Admiral Zexakai realized that 2 battles remained in the human contract. He was beginning to suspect they might not need them. The war should have been over. With their primary stronghold destroyed, their dimensional access severed, and their forces scattered across a dozen systems that had been systematically sterilized by human weapons, the Void Swarm should have surrendered or retreated to whatever dark corner of reality they'd originally emerged from. Instead, they did something that surprised even the humans. They evolved. Admiral, Dr. Thompson reported with a mixture of fascination and concern. We're receiving telemetry from our monitoring stations across the Outer Rim. The remaining swarm forces are adapting. Admiral Zexay leaned over the tactical display in the briefing room of the USS Necessary Evil, studying reports that defied everything they thought they knew about the enemy. Adapting how? They're learning to use conventional physics, Thompson explained. No more reality warping, no more dimensional phase shifting. They're fighting like us. Captain Chen entered the briefing room carrying a cup of what appeared to be liquid caffeine and radiating the kind of dangerous satisfaction that came from solving impossible problems. Morning, everyone. I see you've all discovered what happened overnight. This is unprecedented, declared Ambassador Theron, her ethereal form flickering through spectrums of confusion. The Void Swarm has never demonstrated adaptive capabilities at this level. They're essentially becoming a completely different species. Not a different species, Chen corrected, studying the data streams with interest. Better species. They've looked at everything we've done to them over the past 3 battles and decided to stop playing by their rules and start playing by ours. Colonel Martinez pulled up tactical footage from the latest skirmishes. They're using kinetic weapons, conventional explosives, even basic battle formations. Yesterday, they tried to establish a supply line. A supply line. These are creatures that used to feed on dark matter and space-time distortions. The question, Admiral Zexai said slowly, is whether this changes our strategic position. Oh, it definitely changes things, Chen agreed cheerfully. It makes them about 1,000 times more dangerous. The room fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the occasional harmonic whisper from the hive mind observers. More dangerous? Zek's haze mandibles clicked in confusion. How can abandoning their reality warping abilities make them more dangerous? Dr. Thompson activated a holographic projection showing swarm force distributions across the galaxy, because now they're using the same advantages we used against them. They've studied our tactics, analyzed our weapons, and learnt our strategic thinking. Plus, they still have their original advantages: rapid reproduction, distributed command structure, and the kind of biological flexibility that lets them adapt to any environment within hours. In other words, Martinez added, we've accidentally created an enemy that combines human tactical thinking with Void Swarm biological capabilities. Good job, us. The implications were staggering. The Void Swarm had possessed overwhelming advantages for 3 centuries, but they'd never needed to actually think strategically because their reality warping abilities had made conventional tactics irrelevant. Now, forced to operate within the constraints of normal physics, they were applying intelligence that had remained dormant for generations. They're not just copying our methods, Chen observed, studying the latest battle reports. They're improving on them. Look at this engagement near the Centauri cluster. They used our own nanomachine swarm tactics, but enhanced them with biological components that self-replicate faster than our manufactured versions. Ambassador Thyron's form cycled through colors that indicated deep philosophical distress. We've forced them to become more like us, and in doing so, we've made them capable of destroying us.
Not yet, Chen replied.
But give them another month to analyze our complete tactical database, and yeah, they'll probably figure out how to beat us at our own game. Admiral HFY found himself in the unprecedented position of hoping for one of Captain Chen's characteristically insane solutions to an impossible problem. What do you recommend? We don't give them a month, Chen said simply. We end this war in the next 72 hours.
How? The question came from multiple species simultaneously.
By doing something they can't adopt to because it's completely insane even by our standards, Chen replied. Martinez, show them the Omega Protocol. Colonel Martinez activated a holographic display that showed what appeared to be a three-dimensional schematic for restructuring reality on a galactic scale. Mathematical equations scrolled past faster than most organic minds could process, describing effects that violated several fundamental laws of physics. The Omega Protocol, Martinez explained, involves simultaneously detonating reality bombs in 47 carefully calculated locations across the galaxy. The resulting cascade effect will reset local spacetime to its original configuration from approximately 13 billion years ago. The silence that followed this announcement was so complete that Admiral HFY could hear his own cardiovascular system functioning. You want to reset the entire galaxy to its primordial state, Ambassador Thyron said finally. You want to undo 13 billion years of stellar evolution, planetary formation, and biological development. Only temporarily, Dr. Thompson assured her. The effect should last about 6 hours before spacetime snaps back to its current configuration. But during those 6 hours, nothing that evolved after the galaxy's formation will be able to exist in baseline reality, including us, pointed out the crystalline observer, its mineral structure resonating at frequencies that indicated extreme alarm. Including everyone, Chen agreed. For 6 hours, the galaxy will be exactly as it was 13 billion years ago. Primordial hydrogen clouds, first-generation stars, and absolutely nothing else. No planets, no life, no void swarm, no us. But, Thompson continued, we'll be observing the process from outside the affected space-time, protected by the same dimensional isolation technology we used in the null zone. When reality snaps back, we'll return to a galaxy that has been completely sterilized of void swarm presence. Admiral HFY struggled to process the sheer audacity of what the humans were proposing. You want to temporarily erase galactic civilization in order to ensure its survival. Think of it as the ultimate system restore, Martinez suggested. We're basically hitting Control-Z on the last 300 years of war and starting fresh with a clean galaxy. What if something goes wrong? Asked the hive mind delegate. What if space-time doesn't snap back properly? Then we get to be the only survivors of a galactic reset and start civilization over from scratch, Chen replied. Which, honestly, might not be such a bad thing given how the current version has been working out. The various observers exchanged glances. Telepathic communications in harmonic frequencies that roughly translated as, "Are we seriously considering this?"
There is, Admiral HFY said carefully, one obvious problem with this plan.
Just one? Thompson asked with interest. The moral implications. You're proposing to temporarily eliminate trillions of sentient beings across thousands of species without their consent in order to solve a military problem. Captain Chen was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried none of its usual casual confidence. Admiral, in the past week, the Void Swarm has destroyed 17 colony worlds, consumed 3 entire species, and demonstrated that they're now capable of learning from our tactics faster than we can develop new ones. Our projections show galactic civilization has approximately 15 days before complete extinction. She activated a display showing casualty reports from the past 72 hours. Numbers so large they were meaningless until translated into visual representations of empty worlds and silent star systems. We're not eliminating anyone, she continued. We're temporarily relocating everyone to a safe dimensional space while we clean house.
When they return, they'll be returning to a galaxy where they don't have to spend every waking moment wondering if today is the day reality-eating monsters consume their homeworld. And if they refuse? Asked Ambassador Thyron. Then they get to experience galactic extinction in real time instead of temporarily, Martinez replied bluntly. Not really an improvement from their perspective. Admiral Zexai found himself contemplating the impossible choice between certain extinction and uncertain salvation. The humans were offering to save galactic civilization by temporarily erasing it, gambling the existence of everything against the possibility of nothing. It was, he realized, the most human solution possible to an inhuman problem. How long do we have to make this decision? He asked. About 6 hours, Chen replied. We need unanimous agreement from all surviving species councils, and then another 18 hours to position the reality bombs. After that, the window closes, and we're all stuck with conventional warfare against an enemy that's learning to beat us at our own game. The next 6 hours became the most intense political negotiation in galactic history. 17 species councils debated the ethics of consensual temporary extinction, while their military commanders provided increasingly dire tactical assessments of conventional options. In the end, the vote was unanimous. Not because everyone agreed with the plan, but because everyone agreed that the alternative was worse. The Omega Protocol deployment was unlike anything that had ever been attempted in the history of warfare. 47 ships, each carrying reality bombs calibrated to specific mathematical frequencies, positioned themselves at coordinates that existed more as theoretical concepts than actual locations. Admiral Zexhay watched the final preparations from the dimensional observation platform that would keep them safe during the reality reset. Around him, representatives of every surviving species waited in silence as human technicians made final adjustments to weapons that would rewrite the fundamental structure of existence. All stations report ready, announced the tactical coordinator. Reality bombs armed and synchronized. Dimensional isolation field at full strength. Captain Chen looked around the observation deck one final time, meeting the eyes of beings from across the galaxy who had chosen to trust humanity with the continued existence of everything they'd ever known. Any last words? She asked. Ambassador Thyron flickered through several spectrums before settling on a shade that roughly translated as resigned determination. Try not to break the universe permanently.
No promises, Chen replied with a grin.
Martinez, initiate Omega Protocol. With pleasure, Captain. Detonation in 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Reality exploded. For 6 hours, the galaxy experienced what it had been like 13 billion years ago. A simple place where hydrogen clouds danced around first-generation stars in gravitational patterns that had no names, because there was no one alive to name them. No worlds, no civilizations, no wars. Just the elegant mathematics of cosmic evolution in its purest form. When space-time snapped back to its proper configuration, it brought with it every world, every species, and every individual that had existed before the reset. It did not bring back the void swarm. Somewhere in the transition between primordial past and restored present, creatures that had existed outside natural evolution were deemed incompatible with baseline reality and quietly edited out of existence. The war was over. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted non-binary configurations, Captain Chen announced as the observation fleet returned to normal space. I hereby declare the 300-year Void Swarm War officially concluded. Final score. Reality 1. Cosmic Horror 0. Admiral Zexay looked out at a galaxy that was exactly as it had been 24 hours ago, except for the complete absence of an existential threat that had defined civilization for 3 centuries. Captain, he said finally, your people have saved galactic civilization. Our people? Chen corrected. We're all in this together now. Besides, someone had to do it, and apparently, everyone else was too civilized to get the job done properly. As the combined fleets began their journey home to worlds that were simultaneously ancient and newborn, Admiral Zexai found himself contemplating the lesson of the human approach to warfare. Sometimes, the only way to preserve civilization was to be willing to temporarily abandon it. Sometimes, the only way to save everything was to risk losing everything. And sometimes, the universe needed someone crazy enough to threaten it with extinction in order to ensure its survival. The humans, he realized, had been exactly what the galaxy needed. Even if nobody had been brave enough to ask for them,